Bury me here. I'm not breeding material, she begged, until a human made her pregnant. The ruins of Riven, for stretched in every direction, a dead district of broken glass houses and rusted steel frames. The planet had once exported crops to half a dozen colonies. Now the wind drove grit through the hollow structures, making the glass walls rattle like loose teeth. Keith Vare moved through it with a soldier's step, calculated, steady, every placement of his boot tested before he shifted his weight. At 42, he carried himself with the calm discipline of a man who had patched wounds under gunfire and buried friends in the mud. He had once served as a field medic in the Federation Wars, but those days were over. Now he survived as a scavenger and repairman, trading salvage parts for food and tools. His mission was simple: gather what still worked in these districts before the weather finished breaking it. He paused by a bent support beam, adjusted the strap of his pack, and checked the horizon. His mind was always running calculations. What time he had before the storm hit, what weight his back could carry home, how many steps to the nearest safe shelter if the glasshouse walls collapsed. The silence pressed in, broken only by the groan of shifting steel. He had walked ruins like this before. They always carried the same smell: rust, soil, and a faint trace of chemicals long dried into dust. Movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, the wind pushing fabric across the rubble. But when he crouched lower and adjusted his angle, he saw her. A woman, blue-skinned, kneeling among broken panes. Her long red hair hung in tangled ropes. She wore ceremonial veils, or what was left of them. Thin scraps that had once been formal, now torn and clinging in strips to her body. One hip was bare. Her shoulders were marked by scratches. She was shivering, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Keith's first thought was practical, alive or dead. His second was tactical, threat or victim. His third was personal, though he didn't like admitting it even to himself. She looked like she had been left here on purpose. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. She lifted her head. Her eyes, silver blue and faintly glowing, locked on his. "Bury me here," she said. Her voice cracked, but carried clearly in the dead air. "I'm not breeding material." Keith stopped. He had heard strange last words in war zones, but this wasn't resignation. It was declaration, as if she were reciting a verdict given to her. He pulled his long coat off his shoulders and placed it around her. Her body stiffened under the weight of it. "Don't touch me," she hissed, clutching the coat to her chest like a shield. "I won't," he answered simply. His tone was flat, steady, meant to show control without force. Her hands trembled as she gripped the coat tighter. He noticed her bare feet, cut and bleeding from the glass. She had nothing with her but a broken piece of metal, dull at the edge, clutched in her lap. She had prepared to fight, though she didn't have the strength. Keith's mind worked quickly. Dehydration, blood loss, cold exposure. She wouldn't last another night out here. He crouched in front of her and laid his pack on the ground where she could see his hands. From it, he pulled a flask of water and a sealed ration bar. He slid them toward her across the cracked floor. "Eat," he said. She glared at him, eyes narrowing. "You'll want something." "They all do." Keith kept his voice calm, not asking. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then hunger broke through her suspicion. She tore the bar open with her teeth and chewed, each bite fast and shaky. She drank 2 short pulls of water, then pressed the flask back against her chest as though he might try to take it away. Keith studied her closer. He saw the faint bioluminescent markings along her collarbones, barely glowing in the dim light. He recognized the wristband half hidden under her torn veil, an alloy clasp, the kind clinics used to tally trial subjects. He had seen them before. He understood now. Her name came a moment later, low and bitter. "Aranai." Keith nodded once. "Keith." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You won't get far dragging me. I'm finished. They said I failed. My body is worthless." Her words landed heavy. Keith felt the familiar pull in his chest, the one he'd felt 100 times when someone sat in front of him and believed they were beyond saving. He hated that thought more than the blood and screams he had lived through. He forced his voice steady. "You're bleeding. That's not worthless." Her eyes burned into him, searching for the trick in his tone. She didn't find one, and that unsettled her more than cruelty would have. The roof groaned. A steel brace shifted overhead. Keith calculated the angles without thinking. Wind speed, load distribution, the sound of strain in the metal. If it gave way, the whole corner would collapse. He moved closer. "I'm going to lift you," he said. His voice carried no hesitation. "Say no, and I won't." Erinai's jaw locked. Pride and shame fought on her face. Her hands tightened around the coat, but finally she gave a sharp nod. Keith didn't waste time. He slid one arm behind her back, the other under her knees. Her body was hot against his arms, trembling but lighter than he expected. She held her shard of metal at her side, not pointed at him but outward toward the ruins. He carried her through the broken glass, his boots finding steady ground, and ducked through the sagging frame just as the brace gave a final groan and dropped behind them. Outside, the wind struck hard, carrying grit that stung his face. He adjusted his hold and kept walking toward the half-buried shelter he had scouted earlier. His mission now had changed. Salvage could wait. He had someone alive in his arms, and keeping her that way had become the only thing that mattered. Erinai turned her face into the coat, hiding her expression. Her thoughts moved in circles. Fear of being used, anger at being saved, the sick pull of hunger against her pride. But for the first time since she had been left here, she wasn't alone, and that made her chest ache more than the cold ever had. Keith kept his eyes on the horizon, calculating the minutes before the storm hit. His thoughts were clear, stripped of everything but the practical truth. She lived, so he would get her inside, feed her, and keep her alive. What came after would be hers to decide. Night held steady around the shelter. The wind dropped to a low hum in the pipes. The burner gave off a thin thread of heat. Keith stayed on the floor with his back to the wall, knife within reach, hands open on his knees so she always knew where they were. He watched the door and the seams and the kettle, counting his own heartbeat to keep his focus clear. Erinai slept with her face toward the corridor, one hand outside the blanket, fingers near the coat belt where she had tucked her glass shard. Where her breath hit an uneven patch, he waited to see if it was a dream or a panic rise. It smoothed out and he let one breath go. He ran a quiet inventory in his head. 2 days of dried food, 1 water can tight sealed, 1 secondary can half full, a tin of antiseptic, 5 compresses, 1 coil of copper wire, a lamp with a shaky cell, 2 spare batteries if they held charge, a single spare shirt and trousers, 1 clean blanket, no pain meds left. He had come to the Glasshouse district for parts and intact fasteners. He would return with less salvage than he wanted and more responsibility than he planned. He didn't resent the shift. The mission was the same as it had been since the war. Keep the living alive, secure the space, decide tomorrow when tomorrow arrived. Erinai woke before dawn, fast and still at the same time, eyes open and alert without a sound. She scanned the room, then checked the door, then checked him. He didn't move beyond a small nod. She eased onto an elbow and took a slow breath. "What time?" she said. "Early," he said. "Weather's stable. You can sleep again." "I don't sleep long in new rooms," she said, sitting up. The blanket slipped. She caught it, not shy, just guarded. "Where are we?" "Service outpost 2 sectors south of the glass houses," he said. "Windbreak is good. Roof holds. Burner's safe. No one uses this lane anymore." "Who did you bury here?" she said. Not as a challenge, more as a check for ghosts. "No one," he said. "I took it after a flood. I patched it, stocked it, kept it quiet." She swung her legs over the cot and stood. Her feet remembered the glass before her head did. She steadied on the frame and said nothing. He rose and knelt and checked the gauze he had taped. It held. She watched his hands as he worked, tracking the pressure he used, the places he avoided. "You asked me nothing," she said. "You'll tell me what matters," he said. "You were in the district for parts," she said, eyes flicking to the pack. "What parts?" "Fasteners, intact conduit, greenhouse hinge plates," he said. "I trade them for food and cells. I keep this place working." "You live alone," she said. "Yes," he said. "By choice." "Yes." She took that in without comment. He stood and lit the burner. Water hissed in the dented kettle. He split a ration and added it to a pot, then shaved in a strip of dried root for salt. The smell was plain but steady. He passed her a tin cup, then a spare shirt and trousers. "You can wash," he said. "Curtains there." He walked to the far corner and fixed a makeshift screen from an old tarp and a pipe, then turned his back and checked a seam that didn't need checking to give her a clean sense of space. She moved behind the curtain with an economy that told him she had done this in worse places. He heard the soft pour of warmed water into a basin, the catch of breath when heat hit cold skin, the slow movements of someone fighting the urge to rush. He kept his eyes on the wall and answered his own questions quiet in his head. Attraction was obvious. So was control. He held to control without pretending desire didn't exist because pretending never held. "Your language is good," he said, keeping his tone even to steady her as much as himself. "Trade tongue," she said from behind the tarp, "taught to all trial candidates. So we understand orders." The word candidates landed heavy. "The band was a clinic tally," he said. "What else did they do?" "Blood work and levels," she said. "Hormone shots that make the body quiet. A scan for pelvic markers. Failures marked. Sent out. Told to return if called. No one returns. Shots were off," he said. "Sometimes slow." "That is not what they said." He didn't answer. He poured water into a second cup and set it where she would reach it and not have to ask. She finished washing, pulled on the shirt and trousers, then stepped out and faced him. The shirt fell loose on her frame, but held her heat. She kept one strip of veil as a wrap at her waist, a choice he noted because it mattered to her. Her hair was wet and straight, red against her skin. She watched his eyes to see where they went. He met her gaze and kept it there. "Eat," he said again, same word, different room. She ate with controlled speed that told him hunger was old. Between bites, she scanned the shelter's details the way he would have. Vent chokes, latch throw, escape angles. She pointed at the shelf where the alloy band lay. "Throw it out." He dropped it into the scrap bin. It clinked hard. She listened to the sound all the way down. Some tension left her shoulders. "I didn't lie in a glass house to die," she said. "Not at first. I went there for seed trays. A plant grows in the gutters that holds iron and trace. It keeps heat in the blood. I wanted that more than pity. Then the cold took my feet and I fell. Agency, not surrender." He let that correction stand. "You can still get it," he said. "Not today." "You will take me back," she said. It wasn't a question. "When your feet close," he said. "When the wind eases. When you say go." Her eyes narrowed again, reassessing his terms. "You stand like a soldier." "Abbott," he said. "Field medic." "Finished." "Why did you stop?" she said. "The war ended for me," he said. "Not at the treaty. In a storage tent with 4 bodies I couldn't keep. I had one left alive and a knife in my hand to cut a band that meant nothing. I walked away after that day." She watched him while she chewed, weighing the shape of a man who didn't sell his scars. "And now," she said, "now I trade parts and keep roof from falling," he said. "I don't choose who walks in. I choose how I act when they do." She set the cup down. "I was marked unfit after 3 weeks of tests run by a screen that never looked at my face," she said. "They don't need women who answer back." "What did you say?" he said. "I asked the doctor if his wife liked being counted," she said. No smile, only a dry record of cause and effect. He wrote my name faster. The burner popped and settled. He checked the pot and passed her more. She didn't refuse. He ate his share and felt heat return to his hands. She did the same. "Questions people will ask," she said, surprising him with the angle. She ticked them off with 2 fingers. "Why was I in the ruin and not hiding in a cellar? Because I would rather risk open ground than sleep under someone's roof with their sons watching. Why did I wear the veils and not trade for a coat earlier? Because traders want what veils suggest and take it, and I had a shard and no strength. Why did I stay when you brought me here? Because you talked like a man who did not need proof of his own goodness, and that is rare." His jaw worked once. He accepted the point like he accepted a field note. "What will you ask me?" he said. "What price comes after the bowl?" she said. "And don't say none. No one eats free. Price is rules," he said. "You set yours. I set mine. We say them out loud. No touching unless asked and answered. Door stays unbarred unless you ask me to bar it. You keep the shard if it steadies you." If you want to leave, I'll walk you to the edge and watch until you choose a path. If you stay, you give me your word you won't cut me in my sleep. If I break my word, you cut deep." She absorbed each piece. "My rules," she said. "Do not take my band out of the bin to study it later. Do not tell me I am safe. Show it. If you want to look at my body, say it out loud, so I can say no and know you heard it." "That's fair," he said. He let the admission sit, so she would hear it as truth rather than performance. "One more from me. If I say medical, it means I'm not asking. It means I fix bleeding and infection fast and explain after." She thought on that, balancing pride against survival. "Agreed," she said, "but only for blood and heat and breath. Not for what you call peace of mind." "Agreed," he said. He pulled a small maintenance map from a crate and spread it on the table. It was a hand-marked layout of the district with paths he had tested, water runoff lines he trusted, and red slashes where roofs had fallen. He traced a route with a finger. "Here is the lane we took in the dark. Here is the gutter line where your plant might still be. Here is a cistern that holds clean water if the filter hasn't cracked. Here is a market 2 sectors west where no one bargains fair. I avoid it." "You wrote these," she said. "Yes," he said. "You work like a man who doesn't want company but makes room for it anyway," she said. "That sounds accurate," he said. Her eyes went to the spare batteries and back to his face. "If I stay for a day, what is your plan?" "Food, water, heat, feet," he said. "I will clean the cuts again, stitch if they split, check for infection, run warm soak twice, build you sandal from the broken pair you had, and a strip of belt. You will rest and watch me fix a vent because it rattles in the wind and drives me mad. Then we'll talk about seed trays." She nodded once, the shape of a day, giving her something solid to stand on. She rose and tested her weight. Pain showed, but she set her jaw and stayed on her feet. He handed her a length of cloth cut from a blanket edge. "For privacy when you want it," he said. "Hang it where you like." She looped it over a pipe near the cot, then adjusted it until it hid her corner from the door. She watched him not watch her, and she measured the gap between his restraint and his interest. It was there, and she preferred declared. "You looked at my legs when you cleaned the glass," she said, not accusing, just naming. "Yes," he said. "I stopped when I chose to stop." "You could have lied," she said. "I don't lie well," he said. Something in her posture unlocked one notch. She sat again and lifted her left foot. "Do the soak," she said. "Medical." He filled a shallow basin with warm water and set at her feet. She hissed as heat worked into the cuts and then settled. He changed the water when it clouded and checked the edges of the wounds for angry lines. They looked clean. He dried her feet and taped fresh gauze with careful pressure. His hands shook once, not from nerves, but from a small drop of adrenaline leaving his system after a long night. He breathed and steadied. "Pain level," he said. "Manageable," she said. "If I don't act stupid." He repaired her sandals next. He cut the cracked soles flat, drilled new holes with a hand tool, threaded copper wire through the leather, and braced the straps with belt strips. He worked fast and accurate. She watched him without speaking and learned the pattern of his focus. "Why do you help?" she asked finally, eyes on his hands. "What returns to you?" "Order," he said. "I know what to do with a broken thing when it wants to hold together. And if I decide I don't," she said, "then I feed you and I walk you to the edge," he said. "And I mind my own door." Aaron and I leaned back against the wall, breath steadier now, face less tight with cold. She lifted the bandage at her wrist and looked at the clean skin under it where the alloy had rubbed raw. She flexed her fingers and then closed her hand. She stood, crossed to the scrap bin, and with a small, precise movement pushed the alloy band deeper under the metal so it stopped reflecting the lantern. "That part is finished," she said. "Good," he said. They sat in a quiet that wasn't hostile. Outside, the first light came thin through the vent slats. He cleaned the pot and killed the flame to save fuel. He checked the bar on the door and then unbarred it because that had been a rule. She noticed and gave one short nod. He moved his place on the floor again and set his back to the wall. "I will sleep now," she said. "Because I chose it." "Good," he said. "I'll keep first watch." She lay down behind the cloth she had hung and pulled the blanket to her shoulder. Her breathing even faster this time. The lines at her collarbones glowed, low and steady. Keith stayed awake and held the room with his eyes and his presence. And when his mind tried to run ahead to what tomorrow might ask for, he brought it back to the shape of this hour. A closed door, a woman alive, a map with a plan, and rules spoken out loud where both could hear them. Morning light pushed through the slats in narrow strips, cutting across the floor of the shelter. The wind outside had dropped to a restless murmur. Keith had not slept. He rarely did when someone new was under his roof. He had spent the long hours in half focus, listening to the pipes shift with the air pressure, the scrape of loose grit against the outer wall, and the subtle rhythm of Erinai's breathing behind the cloth she had hung. That rhythm told him more than her words did. It had steadied during the night. When she stirred, the faint rustle of blanket gave her away. She pulled the cloth aside and stood, moving with caution on her bandaged feet. She wore the shirt and trousers he had given her, but had tied one strip of veil at her waist like a sash, a choice she had not explained. Keith noted it and didn't ask. He respected that small detail for what it was, something she wanted control over. She studied him as he sat with his back to the wall, knife balanced on his knee. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Enough," he answered. "You watched me." "I watched the door," he corrected. His tone was flat, not defensive. Her gaze flicked to the unbarred latch. She remembered the rule they had agreed on. He had kept it. That mattered. She pulled in a slow breath and crossed to the burner. "I thought you'd force me to explain myself last night." "You already did," Keith said. "Enough to keep the air clear." "Not all," she said, turning the cup in her hand though it was still empty. "People listening will wonder. Why didn't I run when you carried me out? Why stay when I've been used before? Why talk to you at all?" "Because you wanted heat," he said, then added, "and because you tested me and I didn't fail it." Her lips twitched, something between a bitter smile and disbelief. "Or maybe I'm too tired to crawl." "That too," he said evenly. He lit the burner and filled the kettle. The smell of boiled metal water rose quick in the room. He set another ration bar into the pot with a practiced motion. She watched him, then finally asked the thing that had hovered since the glass house. "Why did you stop when I told you not to touch me? Others didn't. Why should I believe you're different?" Keith didn't look up from the pot. "Because I don't need to prove anything by ignoring words. In war, you listen or people die." Habit stuck. That silenced her. She wasn't expecting an answer so blunt and ordinary. She sat on the cot, still cautious, but something in her posture loosened. When the food was ready, he handed her a tin bowl. She accepted it, holding his gaze longer than before. She ate, slower now, as though she no longer believed he would snatch it back. After a few bites, she said, "You've not asked where I come from." "Why?" "You'll say it when you want to," Keith said. She leaned back against the wall. "Curiosity is supposed to be free. Curiosity costs trust," he said, "not spending yours for you." For a while they ate in silence, the sounds of chewing and the scrape of spoons filling the space. But listeners, viewers, would want more answers. Who Erinai truly was, why she had been discarded, what her life before the glass house had looked like. She must have felt that gap, because she finally spoke without being pressed. "My clan is Zyrene Allen Mixed. They run trials for every woman after first blood. Some pass. They call them fit. Others fail. No children come from them, no matter the pairings. Failures are marked, given a band, sent out." Her voice hardened. "I spoke out during mine. They said my mouth made me useless. They called it proof." Her hand touched her wrist where the band had been. The skin was raw but free now. She added low, "I survived on scraps after that. One trade for one meal, one night at a time. Then no one traded anymore. I went to the ruins for seeds. That's when you found me." Keith absorbed it without judgment. He had patched soldiers who had been written off by their commanders the same way. Different reasons. Same cruelty. "Anyone will come looking?" he asked. She shook her head. "Failures vanish. No one asks. No one pays." He nodded once. "Then the only one watching is me." Her eyes lingered on him at that. It wasn't gratitude, not yet, but recognition of the plainness of the statement. Keith rose and checked the door. Outside, the sky was pale but restless. The storm had calmed enough for short travel. He returned to the table, spread the hand-marked map, and pointed to a gutter line. "You said you wanted seed trays." We can get them. Short trip, back before wind shifts. You walk steady, we try it. You'll take me back to the ruin, she said carefully. You said that's where you want to go. You get the choice. Her jaw set. She glanced at her bandaged feet. And if I slow you down? Then we stop, he said. Not hard math. Her chest rose, then fell, as if something in her wanted to fight the simplicity of his answer. She didn't. Instead, she asked, and if I can't do it? Then we don't, he said. Not the end of the world. Aaron and I studied him. The way he delivered every line without drama, without the need to soften it with empty comfort. That steadiness unsettled her, but it also kept her from flinching. She finally said, fine. We go. He checked the wraps on her feet, this time letting her watch each motion, showing her he wasn't lingering for his own reasons. The wounds looked clean. He tied the sandals he had repaired the night before. She tested them by standing. Her face tightened with pain, but she stayed upright. When he straightened, she caught his wrist. Just for a moment, just enough pressure to be felt. If you try to use me out there, she said quietly, I'll cut you open, even if I die after. Keith met her eyes without flinch. Good. Then we're clear. She let go, unsettled again, but this time with a faint edge of respect she tried to hide. They gathered what little they needed, a flask, a ration, a lantern. Keith pulled his coat back on. She adjusted the sash at her waist, then tightened his shirt at the cuffs with strips of cloth, turning it into something closer to her own clothing. When he unbarred the door, the cold air swept in, clean and sharp. Aaron and I flinched at the bite of it on her face, but didn't hesitate. She stepped out first, the coat trailing at her ankles, head high as if daring the dead colony to challenge her return. Keith followed half a pace behind, eyes scanning every frame of ruin, calculating angles of collapse, exits, safe paths. His mission had changed. He wasn't here for parts anymore. He was here to make sure she came back alive, with her choice intact. The shelter door closed behind them, and the ruins of Riven waited ahead, silent and broken, ready to test them both. The air outside was colder than it looked. A thin sheet of frost clung to the metal husks, and every step across the ruined district echoed with the sharp crunch of grit beneath their boots and sandals. Keith kept his pace even, adjusting unconsciously to Aaron I's slower gait. Her feet, still tender from the glass cuts, pressed against the makeshift sandals he had crafted the night before. He watched her posture without saying it out loud. She carried herself upright, chin high, but her hands twitched against the fabric of the coat whenever the pain spiked. She would rather die than admit weakness, and he knew it. The path to the glasshouse ruins stretched ahead, scattered with collapsed beams and fractured glass panels that reflected the pale sun. Keith measured the terrain like a soldier. Unstable walls to the left, safe footing along the gutter line. A shelter point 2 turns back if weather shifted. He was aware of every angle, every possible threat, not because he expected an ambush, but because habit demanded it. Aaron I's suspicion from the night before lingered. He could feel her watching him from the corner of her eye, waiting to see if he would use this isolation against her. Halfway across a broken courtyard, she stumbled. The bandages held, but blood seeped faintly through the gauze. She hissed, not in fear, but in frustration at her body. Keith halted. He dropped to one knee and tapped his shoulder. Up, he said, voice flat. Aaron I stared at him as if he had just insulted her. I said I would walk. You did, Keith replied, calm. And you did. Now you're bleeding again. I'll carry you the rest. You can keep your shard in my throat if it helps. For a second, the air between them grew tight. She wanted to argue, to spit back pride, but she saw his eyes, steady, unreadable, not mocking her, not testing her, just stating a fact. She gave one sharp nod and climbed onto his back, awkward at first, clutching the coat tighter around her. Her shard pressed against her thigh, not his neck. She didn't use it. As he carried her, the silence stretched. She broke it. Why are you still here, Keith? Why Riven? For, when every other scavenger left. Less people, he answered. Less noise. That's not an answer. He adjusted his grip on her legs, steady as stone. It's enough. She shifted slightly, resting her chin against his shoulder, though the gesture seemed more about balance than intimacy. Still, the closeness unsettled her. His body heat bled through the shirt, his strength obvious in the way he moved without strain despite her weight. She fought the urge to trust that strength. When they reached the gutted frame of the glass house, Keith lowered her to the ground with controlled care. She steadied herself on a bent rail, breathing harder than she wanted to show. He let her rest without comment, scanning the structure. "Seeds are there," she said, pointing to the far gutter trays still clinging to the frame. "If the frost hasn't killed them." Keith crossed the rubble first, testing each step. He cleared the way, then signaled for her. She followed, slower, holding the coat close against the wind that cut through the broken panels. She crouched by the trays, fingers trembling as she pried loose the brittle roots of the iron-rich plants. A few pods remained intact, curled but viable. She held them as though they were more valuable than gold. "Enough to boil. Enough to last," she whispered. Keith crouched beside her. "Worth the trip?" "Yes." Her voice cracked with something he hadn't heard before, relief. She swallowed it quickly, as if ashamed to let him see. They gathered the trays into his pack. He adjusted the straps, but his eyes kept tracking her movements. She noticed. "You watch me like I'll collapse any second." "You might," he said. "Then let me." "No," he replied, firm. "Not while you're under my roof." She laughed once, bitter. "Your roof. Your rules. What happens when I heal? Do I leave, or do I stay because you decided I'm yours?" Keith turned his head and fixed her with the same steady look that had unsettled her since the moment he'd found her. "You'll leave if you want. You'll stay if you want. Either way, I won't stop you. Not my call." Her breath caught. For a moment, the frost-laced ruin was silent except for the hum of wind through the broken frame. She studied him, searching for cracks, for hunger in his voice, for any sign of the men she'd known before. She found none. "You don't ask for anything," she said slowly. "It makes me wonder if you want nothing or if you want everything." Keith didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted the pack, offered her his hand to steady her across the rubble. She hesitated, then took it. Her skin was cold against his, but she didn't pull away. As they made their way back toward the shelter, she finally asked the question that had hovered since the first night. "What about you? You say you keep people alive. But who kept you alive after the war?" Keith's jaw tightened. He looked ahead, not at her. "No one. That's why I don't let the next one die easy." Her chest ached at the bluntness of it. She wanted to ask more, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she walked beside him in silence, the weight of his answer pressing harder than the cold. By the time the shelter came back into view, the sky had begun to darken with another round of weather. Aranai clutched the seed pods to her chest, her pride steadier than her legs. Keith opened the door, ushered her inside first, then secured the latch against the wind. As he set the pack down, she placed the pods carefully on the table, as if they were sacred. She looked at him across the dim lantern light. "They said I was unfit, that I'd never give life, but I kept these alive. That must mean something." Keith's voice was low, steady, almost certain. "It does." And for the first time since he'd found her in the ruins, she let the coat slip from her shoulders without rushing to cover herself again. Not in shame, but in choice. The storm returned by nightfall, harder this time, driving sleet and dust against the walls of the shelter until the steel skin rattled with each gust. The lantern light flickered across the room, casting their shadows in sharp angles. Keith had reinforced the latch and checked the seams twice, then sat at the table, stripping down a salvaged conduit to its copper core. The rhythmic scrape of his knife against the wire was steady, controlled, the sound of someone keeping his hands busy, so his thoughts stayed in line. Aranai sat on the cot, the seed pods arranged neatly beside her on the crate. She had wrapped them in cloth like a bundle too precious to touch. Every few minutes her eyes went to them, as though she half expected them to vanish. The coat Keith had given her hung loose around her shoulders, but underneath she wore the shirt and trousers now, adjusted with her own strip of veil tied at the waist. The shift in her clothing had changed the way she carried herself. Less exposed, more her own. Still, The vulnerability lingered in the way her fingers clenched and unclenched on her knees. "You didn't ask why I wanted those seeds so badly," she said suddenly. Her voice carried over the scrape of the knife, sharper than she intended. Keith didn't look up, only set the copper coil aside. "You'll tell me." Her mouth tightened. Back in the trials, they kept saying failure runs in the blood. That nothing I eat, nothing I take would change it. But there are stories, old remedies, plants the clans abandoned when the Federation came. My grandmother whispered that the seed trays here had power, but they could restore balance. I wanted to prove them wrong, or prove her right. Keith leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You went into a ruin full of broken glass and steel for a handful of roots." "Yes," she shot back, "because I was tired of being nothing but a number on a screen." Her anger burned for a moment, then dimmed just as fast. She looked down at her hands. "I know what people think when they see me. A failure, a waste. Even you must think it." "I think you're alive," Keith said, calm and steady. "That matters more than numbers." She looked at him sharply, searching for a lie, but his tone never wavered. The simplicity of it left her unsettled. She leaned back against the wall, pulling the coat tighter, not because she was cold, but because she didn't know how to answer. The storm roared again, shaking the vent. Keith rose, checked the seal, then returned to the table. He caught her watching him. "You expect me to turn into them," she said quietly. "The ones who pretended to care, but only wanted my body." Keith set the knife down, the scrape of steel against metal silenced. He met her gaze across the lantern glow. "I'm not them. If I wanted to prove it with words, you wouldn't believe me. So I won't. You'll see in time." Her throat tightened because part of her wanted to believe it, and that was dangerous. She looked away, toward the seed bundle. "If these don't grow, if they're just dead husks, then maybe they were right all along." "Then we try something else," he said. She frowned. "Why? Why waste your time on me?" Keith didn't hesitate. "Because you're here. That's reason enough." The room went quiet except for the storm. She stared at him, as if weighing whether he was dangerous in a way she hadn't recognized yet. But he only reached for the kettle, poured water into 2 cups, and set one near her side of the table without looking at her. She rose slowly, crossed the room, and sat opposite him. Her eyes lingered on the steam curling from the cup. "You make everything sound simple," she said. "Life's easier when it is," Keith replied. Erin wrapped her fingers around the cup, absorbing the heat, though her eyes stayed on him. "Then tell me this. If I asked you to touch me, not because you wanted, but because I asked, would you?" The air in the room thickened. Keith didn't move. He met her gaze with the same calm authority he always carried. "If you ask, yes, because choice makes it different." Her breath caught. She looked away first, unsettled by how steady he was, how little he flinched at her test. She sipped from the cup, hands trembling slightly. The storm battered the shelter, but inside the silence stretched long and heavy, carrying something new, an awareness neither of them could put back. The storm lasted deep into the night. The walls shuddered with each gust, but the shelter held, humming like a drum under pressure. Keith had banked the burner low to save fuel, leaving only the lantern to paint the room in shifting amber light. Shadows moved across the floor whenever the flame flickered, stretching and shrinking in rhythm with the wind. Erin sat on the cot, the coat draped around her shoulders, hair still damp from earlier. She had stopped pretending not to watch him. Her eyes followed him as he tightened the last vent seal and checked the latch again, as if she expected him to fail her in some small way. He hadn't, not once, and that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. "You don't ask me what I want," she said suddenly. Her voice carried low, almost lost to the storm. Keith turned from the door. "You'll tell me when you know." Her jaw tightened. "That makes me feel like a ghost. Like you don't see me at all." "I see you," he said steady. "That's why I don't force the answer." For a moment she looked away, staring at the seed bundle on the crate. Her chest rose and fell fast, not from cold but from the weight of everything unsaid. She pulled the coat tighter, then let it slip halfway down her shoulders as if testing him. Her bare skin caught the lantern glow, pale blue marked with faint bioluminescent lines. She waited. Keith didn't move closer. His eyes met hers, direct, calm, but he stayed where he was. That steadiness disarmed her more than if he had reached for her. She shifted on the cot, restless, caught between pride and need. "Every man I've known thought silence was weakness," she said. "Yours feels like pressure, like you're waiting for me to break first." Keith set his hands on the table, palms flat. "Not waiting for you to break, waiting for you to choose." Her throat tightened. She hated how much she wanted that answer. She stood slowly and crossed the room. Each step was deliberate, the boards creaking under her weight. When she stopped in front of him, the lantern light caught the tremor in her hands. She placed them on the table between his. "If I asked," she said, voice low but steady, "you'd listen?" "Yes." Her breathing hitched. She closed the gap between their hands, fingers brushing his knuckles. For the first time since he'd found her, she leaned forward, not in defiance, but in choice. Keith stayed still, letting her guide the space. She kissed him, tentative at first, testing, then firmer when he didn't push, didn't pull, only matched her pace. Her hand slid up his forearms, and she broke the kiss just long enough to whisper, "I'm not nothing." "No," Keith said, his voice grounding her. "You never were." The storm pounded harder outside, but inside, the noise faded. She let the coat fall away, standing fully in the lantern's glow, every scar and line visible. No hiding, no shame. He rose, meeting her without hesitation, his hands finding her shoulders, not gripping, but steadying. Her body pressed into his, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch. When they sank down onto the cot, it wasn't desperation. It was a decision. Every touch, every breath was deliberate, hers as much as his. The storm carried on, but in the narrow warmth of the shelter, something shifted, permanent and undeniable. Morning came gray and muted, the storm easing into a drizzle that pattered against the metal roof in a steady rhythm. The air inside the shelter was warmer than usual, the burners still faintly glowing, but the true heat came from the way the two of them had fallen asleep, tangled together on the cot. Erin I woke first. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her head rested against Keith's chest, her ear over the slow, steady beat of his heart. She hadn't heard a sound like that in years without it being followed by orders, demands, or threats. Her hand was still pressed against him where she'd placed it in the night, half afraid he might shove it away. He hadn't. He hadn't moved at all, except to keep her covered with the blanket when the storm wind had rattled the walls. She lifted her head slightly, studying his face in the dim light. The faint scars across his jaw, the gray at his temples, the creases that came from years of tension, all spoke of a man used to carrying weight. Yet asleep, he looked unguarded. It startled her how human he seemed, how unpretentious. She wasn't sure if that steadiness frightened her more than cruelty would have. When she tried to pull away, his arm tightened reflexively around her waist. Not harsh, just enough to stop her from slipping out. She froze, holding her breath, until he opened his eyes. "You're awake," he said quietly. Her throat felt dry. "I didn't want to wake you." "You didn't." They stayed like that for a beat, neither pulling away, neither pushing closer. Finally, she sat up, drawing the blanket around her shoulders. She avoided his eyes at first, shame whispering that maybe he would regret everything. But he sat up too, calm, his expression unchanged. "You don't look surprised," she muttered. "I'm not," Keith said. "You asked. I answered. That's it. No questions, no claims. I don't need to claim what you chose." Her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever left her dignity intact after taking her body. She looked at him sharply, searching for the trick, the hidden demand. But he only reached for his boots, checking the straps with his usual, maddening calm. "I should feel shame," she said. "You don't," he replied. "Not here." Her lips pressed tight, but she couldn't deny it. For once, she didn't feel used. She felt steady. The silence stretched. She shifted, pulling the blanket tighter. "People will want to know. Listeners, viewers, whoever. Why didn't I run in the night? Why didn't I cut you when I had the chance?" She looked at him, fire flickering back into her eyes. "I didn't because, for once, I wasn't afraid." Keith didn't answer with words. He just nodded once, as if confirming what he had already known. Later, while he boiled water and she sorted the seed pods into small piles, another thought clawed at her. She placed her hand on her stomach, almost absently, then caught herself. Fear and hope warred in her chest. She looked at Keith, then pulled her hand back quickly. "You're thinking ahead," he said, noticing even when she tried to hide it. Her eyes snapped up. "I shouldn't. It's foolish. My body, it doesn't work." "They proved it." Keith's voice stayed level. "They proved nothing but cruelty. Don't let them decide what you are." She swallowed hard, unable to answer. The words sat heavy in her chest, almost too heavy to carry. When he placed the steaming cup in front of her, his hand brushed hers. Not by accident. A deliberate touch, steady, grounding. For a second, she let it linger, then pulled the cup close. The storm outside had passed, but inside, something far stronger had taken root. Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew it. What had begun as survival was no longer about survival at all. The rain cleared by late afternoon, leaving the ruins washed in pale light. Puddles gathered in the cracks of the old glasshouse frames, and the air smelled sharper, cleaner, as if the storm had scoured away the dust that clung to everything. Inside the shelter, the atmosphere felt different too, still heavy with the memory of the night, but no longer clouded by hesitation. Erin I sat at the table, carefully peeling apart one of the seed pods. Her hands worked with more steadiness than before, no longer trembling the way they had when Keith first found her. Each seed was small and hard, pale against her blue fingers. She set them into a shallow tray lined with damp cloth, her movements methodical, deliberate. She wasn't just keeping them alive, she was testing herself, testing the future. Keith watched quietly from across the room as he sharpened a salvage blade. His eyes tracked her movements, but not in judgment. He studied her with the same patience he gave to everything, precise, grounded, ready if she faltered but refusing to hover. Finally, she broke the silence. "If these grow, maybe it means my body isn't broken." Her voice shook on the last word, though she tried to make it sharp. Keith set the blade down and leaned forward, forearms braced on his knees. "Your body isn't broken. They told you it was because they needed a reason to throw you away." Erin I's throat tightened. She pressed her palms flat against the table as though steadying herself. "And if they were right?" He stood and crossed to her. His presence loomed, not menacing but solid, immovable. He placed his hand over hers on the table, warm and steady. "Then we'll prove them wrong together. And even if nothing comes of it, you're still not what they said you are." Her eyes lifted to his, searching for cracks, for the hunger she expected from men. All she found was that maddening steadiness. It shook her more than cruelty ever had. She rose slowly, almost unsteady, and pressed her forehead against his chest. Her voice was so low it barely carried. "They said I was nothing, less than nothing." Keith's arms closed around her shoulders, strong and certain. "They lied. You're here. You chose. That's everything." She let out a shaky breath, the tension in her body breaking as she leaned fully into him. For the first time, she believed it might be true. Days passed. The seeds began to sprout, thin green shoots pushing through damp cloth, fragile but alive. Erin I tended them with a devotion Keith had never seen in her before, checking them each morning as though they were proof of her own existence. Keith repaired more of the shelter in the meantime, but every so often his eyes would drift back to her, watching the way her posture straightened, the way her pride returned piece by piece. One morning, she pressed his hand to her stomach, sudden and unguarded. "Keith," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I feel something." He didn't flinch. His palm stayed steady, covering hers. He met her wide, tear-bright eyes with calm certainty. "Then it's real." She gasped softly, a sound between disbelief and relief. Tears slid down her cheeks as she buried her face against his chest. "I thought it would never happen. I thought they were right." "They were wrong," he said firmly. "You're not nothing. You never were." And now, no one could deny it. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, but for the first time they weren't born of shame. They were release. She clung to him, and he held her without hesitation. That night, as lantern light filled the shelter, she lay against him, her hand resting over his on her stomach. The seeds she had planted were sprouting in the tray, and the child inside her was just beginning. Both were fragile, both uncertain, but alive. They said I was unfit, she whispered. But you made me everything. Keith kissed the top of her head, his voice low, steady, final. Not me. You. You chose to live. You chose me. That's what made it real. The camera of the story would pull back then, the ruined colony stretching silent around the shelter, broken but no longer empty. Inside, two figures sat close, a future alive between them. No question marks, no lingering doubts. It was not just survival anymore. It was a beginning, the end.